I'm Ollie, and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, horror. I've got 10 great atmospheric horror books for you to enjoy in the run-up to Halloween. Now, it's that time of year when people's thoughts turn to all things spooky. The nights are drawing in and it's getting a lot windier and wetter here in the UK, at least. Now, personally, I'm someone who reads horror all year round, but I know that some people do like to read it, particularly in kind of September and October, in the run-up to Halloween. So I thought I'd make a video today with 10 recommendations of books that I think are fantastic and that particularly lean into the kind of atmospheric type of horror. And I think, atmosphere in horror can be really, really important and can make a story that would be, exciting and maybe a little bit scary, really, really unsettling. And what do I mean by atmosphere? I mean stories that lean into the kind of all-encompassing environment of the world that they're taking place in, rather than focusing, particularly on characters and events. I think atmospheric horror tends to focus on like locations and moods and things like that, and really pulls those things together along with the characters and events to make stories that are even more effective than they might have been otherwise. And I think naturally when we think about atmospheric horror, we tend to think about haunted house stories. I've got a few of those for you today, but I've got many other things as well. So let me crack on with a list and you can let me know in the comments what you think. So the first one then is a haunted house story, and it is a classic haunted house story. In fact, it may be the classic haunted house story, and that is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I've got in this lovely Library of America edition. So this is a story about a haunted house, about a group of people who visit deliberately a haunted house to see if it really is haunted, as kind of an experiment. And the atmosphere comes from both the location, but also this sense of uncertainty as to whether the events that they're witnessing are really happening or not, or whether it's in their imagination. So a great work of atmospheric, ambiguous horror, which I think is truly wonderful. Next up, another haunted house story, and one that's very different in vibe and a lot more modern. That is Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. So this is a book that has a haunted house at the centre of it, has a horrible haunted house, and in particular focuses on a traumatic event that happened in that house to the two central women in the story. But more than that, the atmosphere in this book comes from the kind of political feeling, the political vibe in the UK at the moment around kind of trans rights and women's rights and things like that. So there's an anger at the heart of this book which kind of encompasses everything in the book and makes the reading experience quite a traumatic one. So that atmosphere partly is kind of embodied in the house, but also goes much more broadly than that. I think this is a book that uses atmosphere in a really, really interesting way to convey a message as well as telling a story. Next up, another haunted house story, and again a very different one, and a book that many people find frustrating, but I thought was really interesting. House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. So this is a book where the house is, completely central to the story. So about a family moving into this weird house that seems to defy the laws of physics. But the atmosphere in this book is not only about the house, it's also about the way in which the book is told. So this is famously a book that uses a very strange style to tell its story. So, almost every page uses a slightly different style, and you even have pages where you have to kind of rotate the page in order to read the to read the text as you go. So this is a book where the experience of actually physically reading the book is part of the atmosphere of the book and part of what makes the book so wonderfully weird and unsettling. Next, another book that uses location to great effect, but in this case a much bigger location than just a house. So this is The Terror by Dan Simmons, a fantastic and very long but worth the effort book about a sailing expedition to the Arctic in the 19th century, and in particular these two boats that get imprisoned in the ice, so the sailors are entombed by the elements. So a really creepy story that uses both the weather and the location, the boats themselves, to really good effect. So it's one of those books where when you finish reading it, you feel like you really knew, you really know what it would have been like to be on one of those boats. A very, very effective book, and as I say, one that uses location brilliantly. Next up is a book that many people would say isn't horror. Many people would label this as a crime book, but I think it uses kind of gothic tropes and things like that to such great effect that it definitely counts as a horror novel. That is How the Dead Live by Derek Raymond from his Factory series of novels. So this book is about a detective travelling outside of his normal London to a small village to investigate the disappearance of a woman. And as he starts to understand, what's been going on in the village the woman lived in and in the house that she lived in, it quickly becomes apparent that there's something really weird and creepy going on. And part of the effectiveness of this book is down to that location of the village and the kind of crumbling house within it, but particularly the way in which the villagers have reacted to the disappearance of this woman. There's something about that location that feels kind of deeply broken, and it's really, really effective as a result. And when you find out what's happened as well, it's so creepy. It's absolutely wonderful. Next, another British novel with a rural setting, Cunning Folk by Adam L.G. Neville, a fantastically gripping and tense folk horror story about a young couple who move out to the countryside to make a fresh start. And there's a wonderful sense of kind of economic imprisonment in this book. So the couple move to the countryside because they can't afford to live in the city anymore. They buy this kind of rundown house with the hope of making it up and have sunk all of their money into it, but discover fairly quickly that their neighbours are a very strange, very creepy older couple. And that sense of just them just not being able to escape their situation really, really builds as the book goes on and makes for a very, very effective read. Next up, another very claustrophobic story, Blood on the Tracks by Shuzo Oshimi. So this is a Japanese manga series with 16 volumes. I haven't finished it yet. I'm up to volume 10 and absolutely loving it so far. So this is the story of a mother with mental health problems and her relationship with her son. And the claustrophobia in this and the atmosphere in this comes from that kind of parent-child relationship where the child cannot escape from the parent because of the constraints, of society. When you're a kid, you have to live with your parents. It's a really, really creepy story, and as it progresses, you come to understand just how damaged the mother is, and the effect that her mental health problems are having on her son. So yeah, very, very strange at times, and kind of realistic in terms of this is not a story where supernatural things are happening. This is a story that everyday things are happening, but terrible everyday things. So yeah, really, really effective, and I think not necessarily a story that people would leap to associate with the term atmospheric horror, but I think it definitely fits. Next, we have Sheep by Simon McGinn, a very unsettling British horror novel, which centres around a family living in rural Wales who discover bones buried in the land that they're living on. And it's one of those books where the kind of distance from human society and the desolation of the landscape becomes really, really important. So you feel like these people are cut off from normality, which really helps build the atmosphere as the story progresses. Next, something very different, Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright. So this is a very disturbing book about a relationship between two serial killers, where the atmosphere comes from both the physical location, but also the location in time. So what is going on in society at the time of this book. So the physical location is largely New Orleans, which is a wonderfully atmospheric city to write about, and Poppy Z. Bright really pulls out a lot of that atmosphere. But it's also a book that's set against the backdrop of the AIDS epidemic, and that is incredibly effective in terms of giving you a sense of why some of the characters behave like they do. So a wonderfully hopeless book in many ways, but a really, really effective one. And then finally, another British horror novel that makes great use of its location, The Loney by Andrew Michael Hurley. So this is a book set at the seaside, and we tend to think of the seaside as being a wonderful, happy place. The seaside in summer certainly is. The seaside in winter, much less so. And if you've ever spent time in a small British seaside town during the winter, you'll know what I mean. So the wind coming in off the sea, and the sense of a community that's kind of goes to sleep a bit during the winter because it's its busy time is during the summer months. So The Lonely is a book that really taps into that. So a story of two brothers and some terrible events that have happened in their past. But yeah, makes fantastic use of that kind of desolate location to really, really build the creepiness. So I hope you found that interesting, and I've given you some good recommendations for creepy atmospheric horror to read at this time of year. Do let me know in the comments your favourite atmospheric horror books. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're really good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.